That's it? Go outside and play. Kevin, your hand should definitely be up. And when they said that, what was that kind of code for? Get out of the way, you're underfoot, right? It wasn't necessarily like, oh, maybe you should go outside and play, It's because you're noisy, you're in the way, they're entertaining, they're whatever. And they kind of always phrased it as you're like, I don't really want to. And they say, it's good for you. It's a beautiful day outside. Except for it might be pouring rain or snowing and 100 degrees. And yeah, there's that tornado warning, but don't worry about it. If the sirens go off, just come back home. It'll be fine, But they tell you, go outside and play, right? We've all done it. But not so much with today's generation. Most of us sitting, me included, those of you out there in the congregation, that was how we entertained ourselves when we were growing up. We went outside and we played. We made up games with neighborhood kids. We rode bikes. We roller skated. We played tag. And, gasp, we even went to the neighborhood park without an adult. Right? And when did you come home? When it was time to eat or it was dark. And you had to figure that out yourself because you didn't have a cell phone that anybody could text you on and say, where are you and why aren't you home? So you just went, and you had a great time. The definition of play is an activity for enjoyment and recreation rather than a serious or practical purpose, especially by children. In today's world, so many of our children or youth have forgotten, or maybe not even learned, how to just play. They are engaged in a world where they are constantly bombarded with ads, social media, video games, non-stop carpools of practices for sports or lessons or school clubs or activities. And if they had time between all of that, they have at least 850 channels to choose from if you have cable TV, as well as internet. And all of this is accompanied by the fear of letting them go anywhere alone because of the constant dangers that might be lurking out there. And so consequently, we're raising a generation of children today who really don't play. One of the things that happens when we go on these trips is that the kids have no cellular devices with them. They have to leave them home. And they actually really like that. And that means they have to learn to talk to each other. They have to make things up to entertain themselves on long bus rides or car rides or 8 flights on a plane. And they have to figure out how to tell time and how to be somewhere because they don't have a phone that tells them what the time is. So again, they have to engage with each other and figure out where we're going and what we're doing. And so usually the unexpected happens on these trips. When we were in Charleston, Riptide, which is your middle school kids, spent time at a summer camp for low-income children that was run by a Salvation Army, as well as at a home for elderly with dementia. And at both places, their primary job was to play, almost all day long. Now, you might be thinking, what a waste of time and money to send them to do that. And I would tell you what a gift they gave those that they served. Our youth got to grow and learn side by side with those they came to serve. Our kids saw adults in the home where they were working who didn't recognize anyone, who've forgotten the names of people they loved, who couldn't tell what time it was, and had no idea where they were. And yet, when the kids sat down and played checkers with them, or sang, or read to them, or tie-dyed shirts, their faces lit up. And all of a sudden, they became alive again. Our kids sat and read books to children, ate popsicles, had water fights, pushed swings, Like those nasty, dirty metal swings with the chains coming down that are totally unsafe on today's playgrounds and ruled out because you could get hurt, but we all grew up with. And the kids said over and over again, more, one more time, push me, read me another book. While in Charleston, there was a shooting at the AME church, and 9 individuals were killed by a young man who wanted to kill people of color. I was told late in the evening, shortly after this happened, that we were on lockdown and no one was going to be allowed to go outside or do anything. It was almost bedtime, and so I hurried and rushed our middle school kids to bed without them knowing anything about what had happened. And I began to pray for the right way that I was going to handle that the next morning, should we still be on lockdown and the killer not be caught. And the next morning when I woke up, that was indeed what happened. And I had to find a way to look at these kids and tell them that their world completely changed overnight and why. The shock and the sadness in their eyes was palpable. They couldn't understand why someone would walk into a church and just shoot somebody because they looked different. We spent hours on lockdown in another building, and we ended up being the only youth group at that camp that stayed. Every other one packed up and left the next morning as quick as they could. They were out of there. But we worshiped, and we prayed, and we talked, and we played. And in the end, they learned that even in very difficult times, the worst of times, times that make no sense, times where evil is present, that God can take things and turn them into good. And that's what we did. And so while they weren't able to finish their last day, and they weren't able to say their goodbyes to the children, and they weren't able to hug them and talk to the adults, they still were able to do what we came to do, be the hands and feet of Jesus and make a difference in the world. And that's what they did. And when the killer was caught later that day and it was safe to go outside and to leave the building, we went outside and we played. And we had a huge water fight. You will see some pictures. In a small village on the banks of a river in Peru, hours away from any town with cellular service, electricity, cars, indoor plumbing, movie theaters, etc., Wave arrived, and we were greeted by people singing and dancing for us. Literally, as our boat pulled up to the shore, people were standing on the banks singing and dancing for us. And there were children, lots and lots of children. When I was standing on the boat watching, I was standing next to Marina Spiegel. And when I looked over, she had tears in her eyes. And the next thing I know, tears are streaming down her cheeks. But she's got a beautiful smile on her face. And I said, Marina, why are you crying? And she said, I can't believe we're here. She said, we've worked for a year to be here, and we're here. And they're excited to see us. They're waiting for us. I can't believe it. It still makes me cry. Marina's over there too. We were barely off that boat, and our youth were literally taken by the hand by the villagers and began joining in the dancing and singing with the villagers. It was the most spontaneous, beautiful experience I think I've ever seen. The sheer spontaneity and the smile on our kids' faces was priceless. And if the trip had stopped and ended right there, it would have been worth it. But it didn't, because we had work to do. So we then began a tour of the village, followed by a crowd of people and children. When we reached the school, there was a soccer field there. And of course, our kids started playing soccer and jumped in with the locals right away. Well, not speaking the language, although some of them thought they did. We really didn't speak their language. After a few minutes of playing on the soccer field, right? One of the local guides came up to me and he said, do you think our girls could play soccer? Of course they could play soccer with us. You don't understand. In our culture, the girls can't play with the boys. Oh. All right, well, let us kick the boys off the soccer field for you. And so we did. And the boys all stood on the side, and our girls played soccer with not just their girls, but with their women. Jumped in and played an incredible game of soccer. And they beat us with no shoes on. And we have some pretty good soccer players, or maybe only one shoe. Some of them don't even have two shoes. And it was, again, a spontaneous, absolutely beautiful thing as they played. Then, as we began our real task at hand, the building of the church, we could not wait to get started. We had 36 youth and 4 adults, and it took the hands of every single one of us to raise those walls and get that church going as the first walls came up. And what a feeling of accomplishment there was as that first wall went up. As the church was being built, however, we discovered that some tasks needed everybody to work, and some tasks only needed a few of us to work, which meant you had free time. And so, what began to happen was our kids began playing with the children. Babies, toddlers, children, and teens. Toddlers who were left to take care of infants because the parents aren't around to watch them. And so began the new background noise for us while we were there, the constant sound of new words being learned in Spanish and English, laughter. The village was transformed at lunchtime and after school as kids came to join us, and they began running races in school uniforms on break for fun. As they played games, they drew in the dirt and made hopscotch. They made up games with sticks and even a machete one time I did see, and marbles. And our kids discovered tarantulas and a monkey and snakes and things that are in their world. And so we began to play. And one of the most wonderful things is, you know how you spin in circles like till you can't stand up anymore because you're so dizzy? They did that a lot, only they would hold on to the hands of children and stand and just spin them. And the giggles and the laughter and the love. Any of you who've heard that laughter know what I'm talking about. It's not just laughter. It's that spontaneous, sheer joy that comes from children that you cannot help but smile as you hear it. And all around, that's what we were filled with the entire time they were working. And every once in a while, one of the kids, being a little responsible, would come up and say, Jeanne, is there something I should be doing? Is there some work I should do? And I would say, no. Keep playing. Keep playing. Because these families, they don't have the luxury to play with their children. Their families are trying to figure out, is there going to be enough food to put on that table that day? Are they going to have to go farther into the forest to see what vegetable, meaning plant, they can chop down? How are they going to cook the meal? Is there any clean water today to even do anything with? Because the pump that's in the village is operated by the generator, and if the village doesn't have enough money to pay for the generator to the towns down the way, they're not going to have any water. So most days they don't even have any clean water. So then they have to go down to this river with filthy water and fill up containers that they can and use that to cook and to wash their clothes. So no, parents, they don't play with their kids. They don't have that opportunity. And so, as we played and we built a church, board after board, nail after nail, hour after hour, day after day, until at the end of the time there, the church was 90% done. We all built it together, every one of you. All hands were needed. All muscles were sore, all were hot, sweaty, smelly, bitten by bugs, sore, thirsty, ready for a shower. And there were tears as it came time to say goodbye, because we had to leave, and they would have stayed, and they would go back in a heartbeat. But as we left, and as the kids left Charleston, we recognized the importance of playing. Those who went and played are forever changed. And so I say to you, when you leave today, go home and play. Play with your children or your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, your cousins, the neighbors' kids. Maybe find a place in town that has children that need somebody to play for them. I know that's what we're going to do. And so my challenge to you is to go outside and play. And I know your lives will be changed, as well as those you play with, just like ours were. Amen.